Okay, this is part 21 of the basic Python programming tutorial for Blender users. And in this lesson we'll continue looking at classes, and also we'll take a kind of a basic introduction to vectors for those of you who may have struggled with those back in middle school and high school. But they're powerful and they're very useful, and you'll need them in your animation for the future if you want to be a really good animator. Alright, and they're easy, so I'll help you learn them. Also, we're going to take a look at the code and we're going to implement it as well, just a simple vector routine down here. But let's just take a quick look here, just a quick review on, we're going to use a really simple form of vectors like this. So basically, if you have a regular axis, this will only be just for a moment we're doing this. So we have x and y, typical for your regular class, and normally you have a coordinate. Say you have 1, 2, 3, and say 1, 2, and you have this position over here. Normally in the regular Cartesian coordinate system, you plot that as 3, 2. That's your pair, like that, your coordinate pair to represent this point. But when we're working with vectors, we're typically not using it like this. If you have a point for a vector, basically you're representing a vector as a direction and a distance, or we call it a magnitude for distance. Alright, so it has, and the direction is going to be the angle off of this x-axis in this case. So we have this angle here, which I'm not specifying, and this length here, and that's another way to represent this vector. But in this case, since we'll just say we know the point is up here at 3, 2, well then I would represent it like this in angled brackets as 3, 2. And then if I wanted to add one vector to another vector, if given knowing these points, let's say I had a vector up here that went to say 3, 1, or 1, 3. So this one would be another vector like this, and its representation is in the angle 1, 3. And if you know the x and y components of the vector, then it's a simple case of adding them together. So you can take 1, 3, add it to this, and then you just add this component and this component together, and so that becomes the new vector. In addition, is going to be 1 plus 3 is going to be 4, and in the y direction it's going to be 3 plus 2 is equal to 5. So what happens is you can do vectors graphically by taking, say, the tail. You have the two vectors, and I'm adding, in this case I add 1, 3, I'm taking this vector and I'm adding this vector to it. So I would take the tail of this vector, which would be the point down here, and I would set it up here, and I would just graphically draw it like this here. What you end up doing is you form this parallelogram like that, but this point here ends up being your new, well, I didn't quite make it long enough, but this ends up being the resultant vector by adding this vector and this vector together. And mathematically, since we knew the components, that being 1, 3, and that being 3, 2, that being 3, 2, so it would be 4, 5. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, and that'd be 3, 4, 5. So I actually didn't draw it very good. It was a poor drawing in my case. It was, see, the angle was more like this up here, and it was a little bit longer. So it would end up being, this would be your 4, 5 location, that dot there, because you know the components of the vector. But alright, but in some cases, which we will not do in this lesson because it gets a little more involved, some cases you have a vector and your vector is specified by an angle. Say maybe this was 40 degrees like this, say an angle, and a magnitude or the length. So you're given the magnitude and the length, and then what you have to do is you have to find you have to find the y component associated with that, and you have to find the x component associated with that. And then when you have those components, then you can add them together. Well, we won't be doing that in this lesson, but that kind of heads up, but we will do it in a future lesson. But so right now all we do is we're going to add the components of a vector together, and that's what this class does right here that I have implemented right here. So we're just getting a little review of classes. So that's why in this case we're just adding the components. So here's class my vectors, and then I have a method in here called add, and I just give it a couple of values. x1 is 5, y1 is 3, x2 is 3, and y2 is 4, and then it's simply nothing more than x3 is x1 plus x2, and y3 is y1 plus y2. And so when I run the script, if you do that, run the script, it'll end up printing it to the console like that. Whoops, it prints it to the console, and then it gives you the value in return. Alright, so that's adding the component of the vector. Now that's why I said with regular addition, if you were just to pass values in, because what we'll do maybe in the next lesson is then we'll start passing values into this method so we don't have to predefine it like this. So when we call it, like here where I call the method like this, really what I want to be able to do is I want to call it with a number in there as well. Oh well, you know what, let's just do it since we're right here. Alright, so in this case I'll give it I'll call it x1 and y1 like that, and then I don't need to pre-specify x1 and y1 like this, but I want to specify it within here. And oh well, now I'm going to need four parameters coming in. I need x2 and y2 like this. So these are the arguments of the method, or the arguments of the function. Sometimes we call these arguments, sometimes we call them parameters. So I'm basically saying, oh, in order for this method to work, it needs to know about an x component and a y component and another x component and another y component of those vectors. And so then when I actually call the method, I actually have to give it something. And what were those numbers again? What were they? They were 3, 2, and 1, 3. Alright, 3, 2, and 1, 3. So 3, 2, 1, 3. 1, 3 was the first one. 1, 3, and 3, and 2. Alright, so 1 becomes x1, 3 becomes y1, and then 3 becomes x2, and 2 becomes y2. Alright, and so then we'll just we'll specify it, new, we'll just say resultant like that, because it's really the result of adding. Resultant's just a fancy word. It's the result of adding them together. Alright, so then we run the routine. It says the resultant is 4, 5. Alright, so we've passed in a value into the function or the method, and that way you can just specify it this way. So this might be within another routine where you're actually calculating, putting numbers in here on the fly. So alright, well, I hope that gives you a basic idea of, you know, using arguments within the method or the function, and also using some basic vectors. And then as time evolves, we'll do more advanced vectors. We'll actually get the components of the vector if you're given an angle and a magnitude. Alright, well, that's it for this lesson. I'll see you in the next lesson.